Hey, Felicity.
Sorry, did you let Bill in? I thought he was already on here.
I asked him to leave because I was trying to change. I was reading documentation for allowing Q&A, and I thought it wouldn't let me edit. And I thought maybe if I left, I'd be able to edit it to get Q&A, but I don't think that's happening. I think we're just gonna have to use chat.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll come back on in 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think the chat is gonna work just fine. I couldn't remember if we'd used it in the past or not.
We haven't. We might need to be a different account type to use it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what I honestly couldn't remember if we had enabled it in before. So if it's beyond us, it's fine. And we're all good with Facebook and everything else.
I checked on Facebook.
Let me see.
Are you fine doing a quick Aura spiel at the beginning?
Yeah, you want me to?
Yeah, Bill asked this one once too. And I would like it more if you did it than me.
Totally happy to. Let me get prepped for that then. And I actually meant to do this.
Okay, so we've just started recording. I think we'll start. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm the Executive Director of Transit Forward. We are an Austin-based 501c3 with a mission to engage and educate our friends and neighbors here in the Austin community about Project Connect specifically, but also our transit system in general. We truly believe that Austin is a world-class city that deserves a world-class transportation network, and we believe Project Connect is that. And in order to help move things along, we are helping engage and educate our neighbors, and conversations like this are part of that. We are very, very proudly hosting this meeting with Austin Aura. Felicity, if you want to take it away and just tell a little bit about Austin Aura before we introduce David. You're on mute. Still on mute. As a friend of mine once said, technology is great until it isn't.
Yep.
There you go.
Thanks for that. Sorry for the delay, everybody. Hi, I'm Felicity Maxwell. I'm a board member with Aura. And yes, as Bill mentioned, Aura has been working with transit issues for many years. We actually got started working on the rail back in 2000 here in Austin. So it's obviously a big step forward for us to feel like we've passed Project Connect, and we're excited about what transit is going to look like in Austin in the next 10 to 15 years, and really delighted to be co-hosting this because as we were just discussing, the work felt hard to get that vote passed, but actually there's even more hard work in front of us. So we're excited to learn both what's happening here as well as nationally. And this discussion hopefully will be very productive to understand what's happening here and what's coming next. So thanks for letting us co-host.
Thank you, Felicity. So we are very proud to be joined by David Bragdon. David is the Executive Director of Transit Center. Transit Center is a national nonprofit that works to improve transit in order to make cities more just and environmentally sustainable. They really believe that frequent, fast, reliable public transit is essential for cities to thrive. And in their experience, the greatest challenges facing transit are human, not technological, and that transit reform depends on high-performing public agencies and strong citizen-led advocacy. So to talk a little bit about David, David's career spans multiple modes of transportation in both the public and private sectors. He served nearly 8 years as the president of the Metro Council in Portland, Oregon, the only directly elected regional government in the nation. So I share his experience about being a public official, know how that is. They were responsible for land use and transportation planning, natural lands conservation, solid waste recycling and disposal, and operation of regional facilities like the Oregon Zoo and Oregon Convention Center. He subsequently assisted New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's update of Gotham's sustainability plan. And prior to his public service, David worked in the international freight industry, including positions with a cargo airline and a maritime shipping company, where he accomplished tasks like procuring jet fuel in the then Soviet Union. I'm sure that was fun, and organizing cotton shipments to Bangladesh. He also drove a taxi for a year, but the buses and subways of New York are his original passion, so he happily joined Transit Center in 2013 to launch its new philanthropic mission. And I believe, David, you are retiring here in a couple months. Is that correct?
No, I'm not retiring. I'm just going to go do some other things.
You're retiring from Transit Center and moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Yes.
But David, we are thrilled that you are here to kind of give us some perspective about what's going on around the country. And I'll let you take it away. Just to let everybody know, we are going to be taking questions and answers. Please, if you have questions, go into the chat. And if you could say, your name is already on there, but if you could say if you're representing an organization, which organization you're representing, and ask your question. David's going to take between 20 and 30 minutes to give a little synopsis of what's going on around the country. And we're going to spend at least 30 and possibly closer to 40 minutes with a Q&A with David. So thank you so much, David. Please feel free to take it away.
Hey, great. And thank you so much for the invitation. Greetings from Lower Manhattan, where I think it might be warmer here in New York the last few days than what you've got down here. But before we talk nationally or New York or anything else, I want to give you some perspective on Austin. I don't know what, Bill, I don't know what that is you're wearing around your neck, but what I've got here, this is the day that Bill and I first met was the opening of the soccer stadium. And so I've got this here. I'll wear this, my Austin FC scarf. So go team. And on that visit, I had a few impressions of Austin. This is always dangerous. It's like Tom Friedman of the New York Times going and talking to his taxi driver in Jerusalem. And then he thinks he's going to write a whole book about the Middle East based on what one taxi driver tells him. But I had some very definite impressions about Austin that I wanted to share that I think are important for you to hear as an outsider, and how I think you really are poised for some great stuff, and that you're building on some good history in the past few years. But I showed up, it was a Sunday afternoon in July, about 103 degrees, so definitely warmer than you've had it lately. And I checked into the hotel downtown, and I had left my power cord at home here in New York. And there's no Apple store in downtown Austin, which kind of surprised me. But I found out Barton Creek Mall has an Apple store. And I looked on the Cap Metro. I said, okay, the number 30 bus. I'll take the number 30 bus. It'll be my chance to go on an adventure out to the Barton Creek Mall. And the number 30 bus runs every 35 minutes on Sundays, which I wish it was every 15 minutes, but I also noticed on the schedule, they're running it the same Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's steady, it's predictable, it's the same. And the Cap Metro recognizes Sunday's an important travel day, just like Monday through Friday. I thought, well, that's certainly a good sign. Went down to Republic Square, beautiful, nice bus stops, landscaping. I thought, well, this is good too. Got to stand in the shade. There's somebody that's put some thought into the passenger experience here. And then when I got on the bus, again, this is Sunday afternoon, pretty crowded. A lot of people getting off work at hotels. There's a lot of hotel hospitality industry workers. They probably started their shift 6, 7 in the morning and were going home. And then as we went along, we crossed the river, of course, and then like a dozen teenagers got on in swimsuits. They were going to the park there at Barton Springs, and there were families on them, people getting off and on. I got to the mall. I would say the bus stop at the Barton Springs Mall, it's a little too far from the front door. You shouldn't be making people walk that far from the bus stop into the mall. Why not have the bus stop right there, 103 degrees? But mall was crowded, so all this business, oh, nobody's going anywhere anymore. That's not true. They may not be going places 9 to 5, but people are going out and doing stuff, and they are riding the bus, at least in Austin. Got my card, came back out and got back on the bus. And this time it was people who had been shopping. It was retail workers going home. And then we get down by Zilker Park, and the very same teenagers got on, but they were sopping wet. They had been dry on the way out. They were sopping wet. And I had this vision. The only time I've seen that is in Munich, Germany, where there's a tram line that runs along by the Englischer Garten. And people actually float one day way down the creek, and then they take the streetcar back. So I thought Austin and Munich, that's the only 2 places where I have seen people in bathing suits on transit. Very, very well behaved too. It's like Germans, people in Austin, really, really nice. But my point from a transit standpoint, it was a standing load of people on a Sunday afternoon. This is not rush hour, it's Sunday afternoon. People going a lot of different places, young people, old people, people who were working shift work on the weekends, going for recreation, probably people coming home from a church on a Sunday too. So to me, that's the signs of a really potentially successful transit system. That there's a lot of people using it for different reasons, and that the system accommodates that variety of folks. Well, anyway, so that's my anecdote as a visitor to Austin. But I wanted to kind of go a little bit beyond from the anecdotal, more systemically, what I see of Cap Metro from afar. My organization, we're based in New York, but we're active in cities across the country. We have partners around the country. And so we watch what different agencies are doing. Cap Metro is a really fascinating entity, and I think one that you should have some pride in. And let me just give you some perspective on that, sort of what I know and how that laid the groundwork for Project Connect. And I think maybe can help guide you in the implementation, which is now the hard part. Like Felicity said, I said that too when I was elected official in Oregon. We won a ballot measure in 2006, and I went in the office the day after the election. Everybody was celebrating, and I said, "What do you? Don't relax." And now it gets really hard. We got 58% of the vote, but you didn't see anything yet. Now it's like got to spend it well. So I think you do have lessons from the past that are really applicable to this, and maybe Austin type values that you can apply and build on as you're going forward. Again, with all due respect as an outsider, let me say this. From afar, I think we really see you, and I think you see yourself as, a city with real ambitions of growth and density, and a vital downtown and vital neighborhoods, civic infrastructure, this recognition that you have in the ballot measure, which is very unusual, that housing and transportation have to go together. So often that is not the case. You want to know why the Bay Area is a mess and why half the people in the Bay Area are moving to Austin? It's because they didn't do transportation and housing planning together. Those are totally separate. And that's why the Bay Area economy is at the risk that it's in, and why all the companies are attracting the talent down your way instead of they're leaving the Bay Area. So blending both of those in Proposition A, terrific move on your part. But it also builds in a requirement for cooperation among agencies, which is always a challenge because different people are in charge of housing and different people are in charge of transportation. The bones you have, the grid system, it's kind of north-south axis, the number of big institutions and generators of ridership, a university, a state capital, a very vibrant downtown, and these major medical centers, that's a real recipe if you can take advantage of it in the alignments. And again, the successful lines that we see around the country, Seattle, University of Washington, key ridership generator, and connecting University of Washington to downtown Seattle and all those employers, huge deal. Minneapolis, St. Paul, the University's Avenue line, passing by the University of Minnesota and downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, the arenas. Again, you have the bones, and taking advantage of that. So really, really important. And I think the other thing is that you had started doing that before Project Connect, that back in 2018, or even I think maybe a little earlier, the CAP REMAC program and the Rapid Bus program really dramatic improvements to the bus system and really branding that. That is not to be overlooked, and you need to really keep that up. Keep doing that stuff even as you're building the rail, because again, you know, lessons from around the country, the successful light rail systems, Portland, Seattle, really they built from the bus, and they kept investing in the bus system as they built out rail. It was complementary. It wasn't one or the other. And by contrast, those who focused solely on the new construction, Denver particularly, Dallas even more so. I hope it's okay if I say things that are not too complimentary about Dallas in an audience like this, but take it for what it's worth. Los Angeles, to a certain extent, when the bus system is allowed to languish, the rail won't be as successful, because these are not competitors. They're actually complementary modes to one another in terms of the whole network effect and for people. The street improvements that the city had been doing too with regard to the rapid, also really a plus. And I was really impressed with the city staff who I've met there over the years, and the discussion that if you have this vision that the transit agency and the city share, it's easier to get these things done. So the results that we see statistically, you have the highest per capita transit ridership of any city in Texas. There are bigger systems than you, but it's that ridership per capita that's really important. 22% of the population of Austin lives near frequent transit. I'm going to keep coming back to the importance of frequency and the service. 22% of the residents in Austin live near frequent transit. 16% in Houston, 3% in Dallas. So you're up there with Seattle in terms of that access to frequent transit and recognition. Seattle actually makes that, and this may be an implementation idea for you, that a goal of their system is to continually be increasing that percentage of the population that is within 5 minutes walk of a frequent transit line. And that's an adopted policy by King County Metro in Seattle. That's one of the most important metrics that they use. How much of the population is within 5 minutes walk of a bus stop or train stop where they have frequent service? And you do pretty well by that metric, and that would be a great metric for you to really be explicit about trying to increase that, just like Seattle is. And again, it's that focus on the fundamentals of frequency and reliability and speed. So that's a couple of other observations about your situation there with a very vibrant downtown, and looking at where people are and where they want to go, and really having that drive your alignment decisions as well as your sequencing of what you're going to build and maintaining the existing services. And then finally, just a word of note that Capital Metro is also, I think, ahead of the pack in performance metrics and measuring how you're doing, because you do have a contracted out system, and that you're one of the few that really uses the private operator. You have incentives and penalties. Dottie Watkins been doing this for years, and that for punctuality, for cleanliness, and that those matter, and that those are built into your contracts. Huge advantage over a lot of other systems. And again, I think the fact that you have we'll come back to workforce issues, national issue. You now have a CEO who started as a bus driver and understands that. Also a real important thing. And finally, the advocacy that you've had, when you didn't have advocacy, you weren't winning ballot measures, and that there were, environmentalists didn't agree with the other environmentalists, and business didn't agree with environmental, and labor wasn't maybe not been part of it. And when you finally got all that to gel in 2020, that's when you start passing the measures and not having the 49.8 and everybody being disappointed. And, that's, I think, kind of the ethic you have to keep. Certainly in Portland over a 20, 30-year period, it was a sustained civic effort. It's not just when you have a ballot measure that coalition comes together. That's why I'm excited by the work that Bill is doing with Austin Transit Forward, is keeping that coalition together and being that public interest face that's holding the agency's feet to the fire. I know the agencies want to do the right thing, but you have this sort of unusual tripartite sort of thing. You're trying to work that out, I understand. But having that civic sector, people who do think region-wide, gets you beyond the parochialism. Okay, so that's a New Yorker's view of Austin. Forgive me if I'm simplifying or not seeing things clearly from this point. But let me talk about a few things nationally. Big news, obviously, the last couple of years, federal money, the Infrastructure Act, unprecedented amount for money for transit. Keep in mind that is all capital. That's all for new construction, new things. It all requires a match. You know this, but it does require a lot of local effort. And in this administration, and we had a advocate meeting with Nuria Fernandez, the FTA administrator, last week, where she talked about 70 of us who are people from around the country. This administration very clear about Justice 40 is the program that they call it, that they will be looking at applications in light of how does it move the needle on climate? How does it move the needle on socioeconomic justice and fairness to people who've been maybe left out before, and equitable access? And so those are really important things by which you could judge your own system, because that's now how the federal government's going to be judging them. And I think that's also consistent with Austin values, right? That was a big premise of Proposition A, is that these benefits are going to be broadly shared, and that folks who have been kind of left out of the infrastructure or even been penalized by infrastructure like highways being imposed on, that there would be justice in the allocation of these resources. And so I hope you will stay true to that. And it's going to be an important, I think, criteria at the federal level as before. Second major trend, of course, going on across the country is the shift in demand. I'm sitting in Lower Manhattan right now, where we're still at like 60% in terms of, you know, the office occupancy with the subway ridership is at 60% of the weekdays, but and the office, you know, there's a lot of, you can hear echoes. There's some empty floors in this building and many others in Manhattan now, but people are going places. And that's, I think we have overlooked in transportation planning. Everybody always wants to talk about the 9-to-5 worker, but it's like I said about the number 30 bus in Austin on a Sunday afternoon. There's a lot of people who actually, they're workers. They're people who work on Sunday, but they're people going on a lot of different trips. And so really thinking about your demand patterns, not in terms of the conventional 9-to-5, but again, this is a, you know, guidance as you're sequencing these projects and thinking about, you know, what populations you want to serve. Third major trend everywhere is dealing with workforce issues in the transit industry, as they are in trucking and warehousing and ports and a whole lot of other fields. There again, I think the fact you have Dottie if anybody knows about the business of bus driving, it's your CEO, Dottie Watkins. But it, you know, it takes more of that familiarity. The policies, places like San Diego, places like New York, in fact, where they've taken real steps on compensation, as well as just the quality of the job. And it's some tough conversations with the unions. We may have union brothers and sisters on this call, but the fact is there's disparities within sometimes the system, and the younger workers and older workers, the whole seniority system is kind of not very encouraging to the younger entrants and makes it harder to recruit. So those are some tough decisions that have to be made in terms of how do you make this job more attractive, particularly to new entrants. And then just a couple more trends that I think are important to you and real relevant that are coming up everywhere. But one is that the opposition, the futility of highway widening is finally really registered in a whole lots of places. And in Houston, you know, they add another lane to the Katy Freeway, 23 lanes wide, and the traffic gets worse. So induced demand of the futility of adding lanes to Interstate 35 or any other urban interstate is broadly known to everybody with any kind of scientific know-how. Whether TxDOT wants to realize it or other state highway departments want to recognize it, unfortunately, a lot of them don't. But you know, if we keep widening highways, including in Austin, that's bad for the city. It's bad for transit as well. And then the final point, I know you're working a lot on this, but this is a national problem is in this country is project delivery. New York, you know, we just opened the access to Grand Central Terminal for the Long Island Railroad, which was first planned, I think, in 2001. It was supposed to be finished in 2013. It's now 2023. So it was finished 10 years too late beyond the schedule, and then was 3 times as expensive. And Eno Center, who I know you've had interaction with, Eno has some good ideas about that, and you've engaged with Eno. I would really encourage that. To make sure that your project delivery improves on sort of the national norm in this country. And I'll just close with some questions for you, and then you can have questions for me. I think this major issue is sort of the confusion about roles and the role of the 3 different entities. You have 2 established entities that, frankly, by national standards are pretty good performers, talented people. That Cap Metro, for example, is looked at as a very sound and solid group of professionals. city of Austin. That has been my impression too. And then you have the new kind of the joint venture. And, I was reading that, report, just the confusion about who's going to do what. There's no right or wrong answer about it, but it's just clarity about it. And making sure that, somebody's still running the bus system and improving the bus system, and somebody else is building, or maybe somebody else, but that the construction can happen in an expedited way. And how do you have the public involvement while also keeping things moving and not be mired in 20 years of process like they do again in California. So I think that's a huge challenge for you, particularly around issues of planning, like alignments and the programming, the sequencing of when stuff's going to get built, and the federal relations. I think, again, this is something the federal government's going to be looking at too, is like, who's making these decisions? And like, is the region speaking with the unified voice? Because the last thing a congressional delegation wants to hear, or the FTA wants to hear, is one agency in a region saying one thing and the other agency that's supposed to be a partner saying different things. That's very debilitating in terms of federal relations. So I think the sooner you can get this governance stuff squared away, that will make everything else easier. Because your other question about tunnel, no tunnel, left turn here, stops there, all those things become much clearer if you know who is deciding and on what basis they're deciding, what their criteria are. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, or Bill, or Felicity, as you're moderating questions here.
So thank you very much again, David. For those folks that have not asked a question, if you have a question, please feel free to enter it in the chat. If you could put down, your name and what organization you're involved with and your question, we'll make sure to get those in the order that they're put in. Our first question, David, is from Roger Calvin, who's with the Friends of Austin Neighborhoods. What is the most passenger-friendly fare payment system you've seen besides free?
Oh, wow. Well, I think, actually, I don't think free is necessarily as passenger friendly as you might think, because there are complications with going fare free in the sense of lack of revenue for the agency. And an agency that doesn't have fare revenue is an agency that has to find more revenue someplace else. And if you're going to run more service, which I think is the imperative most places, they need to have some revenue. And I think Austin's had some experiments with free fares, and that you end up having some riders who actually don't have a destination, who really should be sheltered someplace or should be getting some mental health assistance, but instead are using the bus for that purpose. And that's unfortunate for them and everybody else. So that's not so friendly. In terms of fare payment, I think the systems, and Chicago is one where it's not a specialized thing, where a card with a chip, can be read, and it's the same card you could use at a 7-Eleven, or you could use it at the, just as a standard credit card or debit card, and that is just, tap and go. So those are the ones that I think are the most passenger friendly. You just have to make some provision for people who don't have those, and make sure that particularly lower income people who should get some kind of discount or some other kind of instrument. And there again, I think Austin's model on that one is another one. We tell people about the program that you have, where Cap Metro is not in the business of deciding who qualifies, but that the foundation, and that there's a separate entity that works with the social service providers to provide passes through those channels. And they're the ones who's deciding who are the clients, so that they're, kind of pre-qualified. They don't have to go through a separate qualifying thing with the transit agency. They've already qualified through their social service agency.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Robert Bowler, who is a citizen and Rethink 35 volunteer. Texas development is so sprawling. Dense development is key, but what can transit do on its own to become more attractive to sprawl residents? For example, are on-demand shared shuttles meaningful, or are there more impactful methods to serve people stuck in sprawl?
Well, I think in terms of prioritize, as a general statement, yes, a lot of the United States is sprawling, and that's certainly true of the Southwest and Texas. But within, of course, the Austin area, just as in Houston or Phoenix or Miami, there are dense areas, and that there are areas that are going to be more productive to serve with transit than other areas. And I think there is a real case to be very good case to be made, that you concentrate the high capacity services like the like the Metro Rapid, like the rail that is yet to come, like any frequent bus service in those parts of the region where you're going to get the ridership. And I think some regions failed to do that. I mean, the Denver system or the Dallas system, they invested a lot in high capacity lines that go, halfway to the Nebraska border and really don't pay off in terms of ridership, because those are more politically driven. No, we've got to serve Plano because the mayor of Plano wants to be able to cut a ribbon on something. Or in the case of Denver, it's like, well, we have to get to Longmont because we promised we would, like 20 years ago. So I think in terms of really concentrating the transit service, there's only so far you can go in terms of chasing ridership in very low density environments. That said, you do have areas where you want to have some service. I think being clear about what you're trying to achieve in those areas and what the right level of investment is important. That's again why having criteria and some objectivity about what projects you're investing in is going to be really important. And that does relate to your governance question. With regard to the sort of on-demand shuttles, they tend to be very expensive to operate and not very efficient. Even the lowest performing kind of fixed route bus service is probably, this is going on a straight line generally, that's boarding 4 or 5, 6, 7 people an hour. That's not a great bus line financially. But even that is higher than a shuttle that is driving around from place to place and going into one cul-de-sac and then out, in terms of getting somebody from that one person's A to that person's B, but having to divert to go through D and C and E. They can only end up serving 3 or 4 people an hour. So it gets to be a very inefficient use of the vehicle. And if they are decently compensated drivers, it becomes a very sort of expensive form of transit. So there probably are parts of the region where that sort of thing is necessary. And I think you just have to be clear about what the costs are and why you're doing them. Australia has some good models. You might look at Sydney, where again, they've sort of priced it out and say, okay, there are parts of Sydney that are quite low density. And so there's certain types of services, and certain portion of the budget is dedicated to those services, but it's a recognition that the per unit cost is also quite high in terms of to the taxpayer.
So our next question is probably a follow-up on some of the stuff you were originally getting to, but it's with Zach from Aura. There are lots of discussions right now about the first part of the Project Connect plan to be built, where that's going to be. And this is, I think, specifically referring to our light rail system. What are the major considerations when determining this from your perspective that would bring the best possible system moving forward?
My personal opinion is, first of all, and I can just sort of reflect on what other places have done, including Portland. But first of all, I would say that you hope this is something that's going to exist for 100 years, and it's going to that the ease of building something, getting something done quickly, is less important than putting it in the right place. And sometimes putting it in the right place has the most complications in terms of construction and in terms of people objecting to it. But that pays off in the long run. I heard former mayor, he was then, or I should say then Mayor Steve Adler, talking in July when he talked about your red line, and said, and I thought this was also very refreshing, because he actually said, I hope that it was a public meeting, there's hundreds of people there, so I don't think I'm saying anything confidential. It was, last year anyway, and he's out of office. So he said, I wish we hadn't done that, but he was explaining, it was built where it was because there was no objections. It was an existing freight right of way, and we could just do that. And other cities have done similarly, because it's like avoids controversy in the construction period, but then you're stuck with something that problem is there's nobody there to ride it. The ridership is not very high. So my opinion in terms of sequencing it is, go where your strongest ridership is going to be, have an equity focus on that there's often quite a overlap between sort of low income people and transit propensity and transit ridership. And that I would, as a general rule, and I don't know enough about Austin to speak to any particular alignment, but to be putting to put that investment where the people are and where the travel demand is I think very important, and that would be an important guide to me, again, with the filter of making sure that that the ridership is also moving you along toward fairness and equity and opportunities, access to work and access to be able to participate in society. So that's really where I think the focus should be. And on ridership, if you're going to make progress on climate, ridership is a big part of that too. So I just look at the numbers, and I mean, you have a downtown that before the pandemic, more than 200,000 jobs, and the university, I mean, huge. Again, I talk about the University of Minnesota, what that means to Metro Transit in the Twin Cities, or University of Washington, what that means to Sound Transit in Seattle. That you have a huge university in the downtown, that's a lot of trips. Whereas, a convention center, that may be 10,000 people on a good day, that are people, 10, 15,000 people there for a couple of days. Airports too are, I don't know how many enplanements there are at your airport, but it's a fraction of that number of people. Like, how often do you go to the airport, right? Ask yourself that. You may go maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And how often do you go to work, or how often do you go to hear music, or how often do you go shop? That's like 7 days a week. And so I think trying to serve those multi-purpose riders year round is where the investment ought to go.
Cool. So Roger, I got your second question, but if it's okay with you, I'm just going to go to some of the other folks first to give everyone a chance to have at least one question. I'll come back if we have time. So thank you, Roger, for your question. We have Srikar with the West Neighborhood Association, a member but not officially representing. David, the question from Srikar is, I noticed in the Project Connect community engagement, trying to knock this thing down. There we go. We mostly look to examples of light rail projects from other cities in the US. As you noted, many systems in the US have issues with delivering projects in a reasonable time frame / cost. What are some good ways we can encourage our agencies to look at international examples of systems, projects, best practices to the extent that can be translated over? And I would just personally add, when I was on your call for Transit Center last Thursday, they talked about the ENO report, literally just came out talking about some of these things. So if you could maybe put some highlights of that out there, that might be useful for the folks watching here.
Yes. Well, the ENO Center, I think you've already contracted with the ENO Center on the governance of how your 3 agencies or the 3 entities are going to work together. But ENO is also famous for having done a report that we helped to underwrite. It was also underwritten by the Federal Transit Administration, looking at this chronic problem in cities across the United States in delivering large infrastructure projects, including transit, but the same is true in the highway realm. It's the same is true for water projects, and a lot of other kind of big public infrastructure is not very efficiently built, not very cost effectively built. And just to summarize their findings, there's no one single culprit. It's a very nuanced situation. But you can also think about it this way, that because it can be oversimplified, saying, oh, well, the United States has all these onerous environmental regulations. And in fact, but so does Sweden. So, Sweden has stricter ones than we do. So, how is it that they are able to deliver projects at half the cost? So it's not all about environmental. It may be the way they're applied, but it's not a matter of being strict on the environment or not, because other countries that are as strict or stricter have lower costs than that. It's not all about labor wages either, which can be lampooned. Oh, well, people are, now maybe the structure of how many people are working on a given piece of equipment, but again, we're talking about, wages are not low in France, right? Yet they're still building things at half the cost that we are. So the ENO report really talks about a number of different things that could be done. One, I think, that's very germane to you all, particularly as an agency that's new at building big stuff, is having enough capacity in the public sector in terms of having it be an attractive career for an engineer, for project managers, and to really have experienced, talented people and compensated accordingly in the public sector, so that they're not overly reliant on private contractors or private, consultants. Though there's also benefit to having specialized private. So it's that balance of who, expertise is kind of another one. There are the civic engagement parts of it that add time, and of course, in projects like these, time is money. So like this extension of Muni that goes up toward Chinatown from Union Square in San Francisco, part of the problem there is that in San Francisco, everybody has to be, talked to, consulted with. Literally all 600,000 people in the city have to be able to express their opinion 5 times. And so that therefore it takes, 20 years to build something. So, all I can say is that, Report has a lot of good suggestions, and you have some smart folks working on things there in Austin, that you could be a place that kind of puts some of that to work and delivers some of these projects better than other parts of the country. Portland is actually quite good on it. Actually, Portland's is one place that has delivered light rail projects on time and on budget, more so than other places. So that's and Sound Transit's pretty good too. So if you wanted to look at 2 agencies in the U.S., but again, this is another. It's like a learning experience. When Sound Transit first built its first thing, it was kind of a mess. They had to rebuild not literally a mess, but it was cost overruns and stuff. And they really had to get their act together with Sound Transit and get better at it over time. But I think that would be another good one for you to look at.
So as David continually talks about workforce, let me use this time to shamelessly plug Transit Forward's next quarterly lunch, which will be 2 weeks from today at 11:30 at the Goodwill Center on the north part of town. The details are all on our social media, but we will be having a panel discussion talking about the intersection between jobs, workforce, and transit, specifically talking about both the construction and operations needs of Project Connect as it expands. And that's obviously going to be overlaid with all of the other projects going on here in Austin at the same time as well. So if you're interested in that topic, please feel free to join us. You can sign up at our Eventbrite page there. Next question, David. Actually, Felicity, let me just ask, is there anybody on Facebook with any comments or questions? No? Okay, cool. Our next question is from John Fisher with WSP. David, thank you for sharing your insights. In your meeting with Administrator Fernandez, did she address the pending fiscal cliff to some existing transit agencies that rely on Farebox for operations? And what impact do you think this has on cities developing new services like Project Connect?
Yes, certainly. And she made the point, which was not a new point for anybody who was in that room, that this large amount of federal money being devoted to capital does not address the fact that major cities, to varying degrees, have an operating deficit, and that is to some extent correlated, as John Fisher just referred to, is partly correlated to those who've had a traditionally high farebox recovery ratio. So here in New York City, fares cover 50% of the operating costs of the MTA. BART, it's even higher, I believe. I think they were up around 58. Caltrain on the peninsula, even higher than that. And so the loss of or the downturn in ridership affects them in a fiscal way that's more pronounced than places that aren't as reliant on fares. So yeah, we're doing some research to sort of quantify that, see what that means in different places. And I think, unfortunately, the solution is different in different places depending on what their fiscal capacity is. So here in New York, just last week, the MTA, which is controlled by the state of New York, so that's very different from you, where the state of Texas really has nothing to do with Cap Metro, other than being on the logo, but the state capital. But the governor of New York proposed an increase in the payroll mobility tax in this region, which is one of the tools that is available to them here in this region to close that gap. And then we will also have congestion pricing in terms of charging motorists to come into a certain part of Manhattan at some point, 2024 or maybe 2025. That will go for capital, actually. But whereas California, the Bay Area, what they're looking at they can go to the ballot, which is not something that's known here in New York. This is not part of the constitutional structure here in New York. Whereas California, they can refer things to the ballot. And so they're looking there at doing something, all 9 counties, I think, of the Bay Area. And it may be some combination of sales taxes and property taxes or other sources to raise money at the ballot box, which I think in your case, I mean, you went to the ballot. It's a pretty significant, raising of funds of $7 billion with your 2020 ballot measure. I don't know what that means for you on the operating side, or what Cap Metro's historic kind of fair tax recovery ratio is.
And I can actually answer that, because
Yeah.
we just had this conversation with Austin Transit Partnership. They are going to work in allocation for operations as part of the funding package moving forward for Project Connect. So yes, some money will be allocated to capital and obviously bonding on that, but other portions of that funding stream are going to make sure to be held back so that they can fund operations and maintenance, because that's really critical to these things.
It is so critical, and you have to keep that going, because that's how you continue to steadily build ridership. That's why I keep stressing, keep that bus system going and expanding. And Denver really kind of let its bus system go. And somebody said at one point in the early part of the century, it's like RTD, the transit agency, became more of a construction company, that was very focused on building new stuff. And that was the focus. That's where all the managerial attention went. And they really let the bus system languish, and that they lost some of their most loyal riders. And then, the fact is the rail needs to be woven in with the bus system. Even in Portland, Seattle, the bus, even though they have really now robust light rail networks, the majority of the riders are still on the bus. I mean, London, right? England, there's more bus passengers, I believe, than tube passengers. I mean, because it goes everywhere, right? And it takes a lot of short trips and stuff. So yeah, I just really want to underline, even though we're kind of we have a lot of capital flowing into the industry, both through ballot measures and this federal funding, that operating is so important, and keeping those operations going and expanding.
So David, I really want to respect your time, and we appreciate this.
Yeah.
We got 15 minutes left. We had a bunch of questions come in, so I'm just gonna fire these at you. We'll go rapid fire like a game show.
Sure.
Question from David Faust with Aura. This is actually going to be my question, should we needed one, but he's actually right on. What factors have you seen around the country to be essential for the success of equitable transit-oriented development around these transit corridors? We're going through those discussions literally right now.
Yeah, zoning. I mean, deregulate the zoning. Let the market really build out. San Diego did that. San Diego eliminate the parking requirements for not storing a bunch of cars right next to the station. So I would say, first and foremost, it's the deregulatory piece. Let the market happen, and then some targeted subsidies as well. Displacement's an issue in Austin and some other places, and so something to there's a financial piece to that on the public side too.
Cool. Next question is from Tom Wald with the Red Line Parkway Partnership. Have you seen successes elsewhere of giving green lights to quote unquote regular buses by default? This would go beyond just extending greens or queue jumps and would cycle the lights to green as the bus approaches.
Yeah. I mean, I can't name places, but certainly anything that increases reliability and speed for buses is generally a very, very good thing. Those are two of the things that are most important to riders, keeping the bus moving and keeping on schedule. So signals are a big piece of it. So is fare payment and being able to pay off board through all the doors and exclusive lanes. So the signals are part of a larger suite of things that have to be done. And and in some contexts, the signal is more important. In other places, the exclusive lane is more important. So it really takes, a city DOT that really understands what solution works in which place.
Cool. So for those of y'all that were interested in that ENO report that David was talking about best practices for keeping costs down while building systems out, Ross Van Dongen from Accelerator for America put that link in the chat. So if you are interested in that, he has that there. And then Zach, can someone define what ENO is? ENO was a person who actually founded the Eno Center through a monetary disbursement. And they do a lot of data gathering for transit agencies across the country. The Eno Center actually did a report here in Austin on the governance structure between ATP and the Cap Metro services, and you can read that as well. Next question down. Let's see. Everyone's got all that. Another question from Robert Bowler. Austin is full of software makers, including Mia Designer, whether for riders or agencies or cities. What challenges do you see facing transit that could be reasonably helped by software or data?
And by the way, I just moved because I was running out of battery, and I plugged into the very same recharger that I bought at the Barton Creek Mall in Austin. So I'm using that to recharge my computer right now. So yeah, data is very important, and the sort of the civic entrepreneurs and are often better at being able to marshal some of that than the agencies themselves. And so in terms of like information for riders or even analytical, that often, you know, having the tech stack, it's also a challenge often for public sector agencies to hire and retain IT talent. So if I'm getting the question, I think it's like what's the role of independent software and data folks? I think it can be quite large. It can be very important in our industry. There's a report on our website. I put our website in the chat too, transitcenter.org. And we have a report that is actually here. I can pitch it right here. The data that transit riders want, and it kind of discusses some of, I think, what's implied by the question.
Okay. Our next question comes from Yorgos Economics. I'm not sure who that is, but the question is actually a good one. We experience a lot of weather extremes here in Austin. And by the way, as we say that, let me take this time to say I hope everybody on this call is safe, warm, and dry, and then all of your neighbors are as well. David, I don't know if you understand this, but we had a pretty major ice storm here in Central Texas that knocked out a lot of folks' power. I had my power out at my house for 2 days, and there's still some folks, unfortunately, experiencing power outages. But we also, you were here in the summer when it was 104 degrees. And so that
Right.
leads to this question. With plenty of blazing heat in the summer and freezing ice storms in the winter, what type of effective weatherproofing have you seen in other cities that provide adequate protection for riders on their way to use transit?
Oh yeah, well, it's a really important issue that comes up in our surveys of riders when you ask, you know, what it takes to really make transit attractive. It's not just the transit, and this is where the partnership with the city is so important. You know, having sidewalks and the ability to walk safely to transit is so important. So street trees, I mean, these are, you know, this is basic sort of urban ecology. You know, and I think you have a pretty good parks network too, from everything I've seen, but you know, street trees, reducing urban heat island effect. In terms of the infrastructure itself, I mean, the New York MTA has actually done a lot in terms, of course, the it's different risks in different places. Here, it's about flooding and, you know, coastal flooding here, and rail lines that are along the East River, along the Hudson River, or rail yards that are in the New Jersey Meadowlands, for example. So different agencies, and I think APTA, the American Public Transit Association, has had a working group on, you know, what they call climate resilience or adaptation to changing meteorological and sort of weather conditions. So like other infrastructure providers, agencies are really having to think about that.
So a couple more questions here. We've got about 8 minutes left. The first is again from Roger, and this is one that I was going to ask you about as well. How are cities dealing with recent cost inflation versus building a system with capacity to accommodate future ridership questions? We're obviously going through right now that for the Project Connect light rail system here in Austin, we'll be doing some community engagement on that. The city and Cap Metro and ATP are going to be doing that here pretty soon. I'm just curious, from your experience around over the last year or so, how have other areas really dealt with these inflation situations when it comes to construction of new systems?
Yeah, everybody is dealing with it, and it's particularly sensitive in cases like yours or Seattle or Los Angeles, where a certain set of projects was promised to the voters. In their case, it was 2016. Both Seattle and Los Angeles approved big measures in 2016 that had specific maps like you did, that had particular lines and that were consistent with the cost estimates of that time and no longer achievable under current cost. And so it becomes a very fraught issue of, how do you change people's expectations in terms of the sequencing? And I don't think there's any good answer to it because it's a very thorny problem. I guess I would just approach it trying to be as transparent as possible. And if you're doing, quote, value engineering or sequencing things or paring things back, be as clear as possible about what criteria you're using to make those prioritizations so that, and be transparent about the decision making. And I think that's going to be a real issue for you all to get clear up front. And like, is ATP going to make those decisions if that's the case, or is it going to be the Cap Metro board, or is it, who is it and on what basis? So I can't tell you what the right answer is. And I can't even describe what the right governance structure is and nor did Eno, but I can just echo what they said, which is decide, that be clear about that in advance and get the ambiguity out of it before the ambiguity becomes a problem in and of itself. So I know, like Seattle, I follow that somewhat closely, that they have had to, defer, push things into outer years. And Seattle has a, very vibrant sort of civic culture and tradition of transparency. And so I think while there's unhappiness that things have been pushed out, there's at least, I believe, some common understanding of why and who's making decisions. It's like clear who, like the Sound Transit Board, it's clear who they are, meetings are in open public, and the criteria is clear. So I think you have to try to achieve a similar sort of mindset.
David, let me, this is kind of, I'm going to resolve this last question and kind of take the opportunity to ask you this. We're going to be moving into a public comment and engagement portion for these questions that we're talking about here. Austin loves community engagement, and it's one of the things I've loved about this town since I moved here is people are very energetic. They want to be involved. They want to feel like they know what's going on, and they want to make sure that their opinions are heard. And that's all really, really amazing and wonderful. The question would be, do you know of any experiences in other places where they've really managed to thread the needle of having really good, solid, useful public engagement, but not at the cost of having it, as you talked about, California drag on for 20 years? Have you found some best practices there of how to engage folks, but do it in a way where you've got kind of a target date and you can say, we need to know by now so we can go?
Yeah, I think leadership is very important. The elected officials, needing to have some, that we are, we're representative democracy, not a mass democracy, and that the public has spoken that they want transit in Austin. They voted in pretty overwhelming numbers in 2020, but that doesn't mean that every person is going to be fully satisfied with every bit of the implementation. But I think the conventional ways of going and having public meetings at 7:30 at night, and then the only people who are going to show up at that are people who have the time. So people who have kids or people who are working nights or people just have a lot going on in their lives are not likely to participate in that type of format. And so ways of measuring opinion that actually just go to where people are, or that are objective sort of survey kind of related things, ought to carry a whole lot more weight than just who's the loudest person and who shows up at a conventional sort of hearing.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Does anybody have any last minute burning questions that they want to ask David here? And by the way, I also want to take this time to thank Aura for your partnership with Transit Forward on this. You guys have been amazing working with us on this issue. We at Transit Forward believe really intently that partnerships and combining our resources with each other are the best ways to move forward as a community. And we encourage our government agencies, as David talked about fairly explicitly, to partner together as well, row in the same direction, realize that we're all in the same sandbox here, and we've got to get things moving by working together. And so we appreciate the partnership with Aura and everybody else. And David, thank you so much for your time. Once again, for anyone interested in watching this online again, we will be posting, Aura and Transit Forward will be posting this this video to our YouTube sites. Please feel free to share that as much as possible. All right, last one. David, real quick before we go, from Tom, what US Metro has achieved the best transit bike integration?
I'm just going to guess. I said get on Interstate 35 and go about 1,000 miles north and check out the Twin Cities.
Okay. Thank you everybody so much for your time. We are exceedingly appreciative of your involvement, your wonderful questions. David, thank you again.
No, thank you.
us.
This is great.
This is wonderful. And I hope everyone has a really safe, dry, and warm rest of your week as we get back to what we're used to around here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.